So, hello everyone. We are here to have the very first lecture in the under our distinguished lecture series that we have planned under the program Digital Governance and Management. And as all of you've heard, that this is the first of its kind program in India, which is launched at IIM. And in this particular, through this distinguished lecture series, we are inviting distinguished personalities who have extensive experience in this field of digital governance and management. And we just hope that this will complement with the in-class learning that the students are having at IIM, with the practical inputs that these distinguished personalities are going to talk about. And in the first talk under this series, we have invited Shri J. Satyanarayana, who has been a former Secretary MeitY, to address our students. And our director, Professor Chandrasekhar, will give an introduction of Shri Satyanarayana, and then we will go ahead with his talk. Yes, sir,
Yeah.
please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Nina. First of all, I must thank Sri Satyanarayana ji for readily, with cheerful promptness, agreeing to our request to be the first speaker in this distinguished lecture series. Friends, he is no stranger to all of us, particularly all of us, most of us come from the IT domain or have knowledge of IT or have enjoyed the fruits and benefits of IT in this country. But still, for the sake of completeness, and it is customary to say a few words about the lead speaker, so I would not like to deny myself that opportunity and proud privilege. Sri Satyanarayana is a 1977 batch IAS officer who has been serving this country now for 43 years in programs and projects that are meant for public purpose, for the public, larger public good. And his priority and principle has always been people first when he kind of visualizes these projects. Friends, currently he is the chief advisor of the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, India Center of the World Economic Forum. He is an advisory board member of the Global Forum on the Cyber Expertise, which is headquartered at Hague, Netherlands. He is a chief advisor of the National Digital Health Mission, and he is also the advisor to the Prime Minister Jan Arogya Yojana. As all of you know, friends, PMJAY is the largest health insurance scheme in the entire world, and he has been holding that position since the inception of the scheme in 2018. As Nina said, Sri Satyanarayana ji was formerly the chairman of the Unique ID Authority of India. He was also the advisor to the government of Andhra Pradesh. And of course, as all of us know, he was the Secretary, Department of Electronics and IT. In fact, Sri Satyanarayana ji should be credited with coining the acronym DAITY, for the Department of Electronics and IT. Well, friends, he is a visionary, he is a thought leader, he is a change maker in e-governance, enterprise architecture, and digital transformation. He can rightly be considered as a pioneer as far as the digital governance and transformation projects are concerned, whether it is for policy formulation or process reengineering, promoting practical solutions. I would tell you why in a little while from now, their pragmatic deployment or their successful implementation. The several policies which are piloted and championed by him include the National Electronics Policy, the National Cybersecurity Policy, the Andhra Pradesh Cybersecurity Policy, and the AP State Enterprise Architecture for E-Governance, which was called E-Pragati. And this is the first ever integrated framework and architecture in the entire country, which integrates G2C, G2B, G2E, and G2G services. He was the champion of more than 20 transformational projects in this country, which have redefined service delivery in this country. Starting with, many of you would not know, there was a pioneering project called CARD. People of my time would remember CARD was Computer Aided Administration of Registration Department when Satyanarayana ji was the Chief Commissioner of Land Administration. Of course, prior to that, he was Secretary and Principal Secretary in the ICT department in AP. And this was followed by the kind of game-changing e-Seva project, which was implemented all over the country. taking AP model as a role model, as the guiding force. Everywhere else, all over the country, this project was implemented. The most famous MCA 21 project and the Passport Seva project, which has touched the lives of each and every one of us. All the projects of Sri Satyanarayana are characterized for their integrated approach, for their inclusiveness, for their efficiency, ensuring equity, accessibility, affordability, assurance of service, and hence high acceptability. All his projects have won several awards, whether of Computer Society of India, whether the Commonwealth Administration for Public Administration and Management, whether the eSeva Award won the PM's Award for Excellence in Public Administration, or the National E-Governance Awards. Case studies have been written on the projects championed by Sri Satyanarayana ji, whether it is by whether the case studies in the repository of Case Center at UK, or by IIT Bombay, or by Professor Subhash Bhatnagar of the IIM Ahmedabad. These are all available in public domain. And as founder CEO of the National Institute for Smart Government, Sri Satyanarayana ji has led several capacity building programs across India. In fact, whatever we are doing is actually kind of a progression of what he had started when he was in the Department of Electronics and IT. He had chaired several committees that prepared the India enterprise architecture, the digital service standards. He's a strong votary of standards-based application, and the National Digital Health Blueprint, which was released exactly about a year ago in 2019. Friends, I am a resident of Andhra Pradesh and I have been in Hyderabad since 1979. So I have been the direct beneficiary of the magic created by Sri Satyanarayana ji and Sri Ajay Sahni, who this country, I would say, has had the good fortune. Both were champions of IT. Both of them were in the state of Andhra Pradesh and both of them later at the central government. And the good work that they have done, both at the center and in the state, have had huge positive impact on the lives of individuals and institutions. Sri Satyanarayana ji has written 2 books, The Science of the Possible, which is published by the Prentice Hall of India in 2003, but several reprints have come out later. The second one is called Managing Transformation, Objectives to Outcomes, which is again published by Prentice Hall of India. These are guiding books for anyone in the digital transformation, working in the digital transformation space. And I would be very happy, pleased to announce that we will provide a copy of each of these 2 books to all the participants of our digital governance programs free of cost. And if hardbound, I think the second book is available as a Kindle version. We will provide you the Kindle version if the hard copy is not available. And I will just take a minute here to say that the World Economic Forum's, today I had the opportunity to look at the World Economic Forum site, and there are several white papers there on digital governance, on cybersecurity, on business process reengineering, etc. So I would urge the participants to look at that. So friends, to summarize, much of the ICT development and deployment in this country owes its existence to what Sri Satyanarayana ji has started and his visionary foresight. If we are priding ourselves today in the percolation or pervasiveness, profundity or popularity, and the positive impact of these ICT initiatives in the country, the seed for all these was sown by Sri Satyanarayana. So I would only like to come, because I have I have had kind of the pleasure of interaction with him, the opportunity of interaction with him on quite a few occasions in the past, and he strikes. What strikes, the persons who interact with him are his humility, his humanism, and his humaneness. Sir, this student cohort, as I mentioned before, some of them joined, are civil servants from the center and state. There's a few of them are from the corporate sector, whether it is public or private. And as I said, this is the first ever program, unique program of its kind in the country. And we have the first batch of students eager to listen to you, sir. We are trying to put together a curriculum that is current in context and contemporary in content. And the icing on the cake, the real value add for these programs would be when distinguished personalities like you and address the cohort, sir. all of us are looking forward with eagerness, sir, to listen to you, because there is always a great learning from listening to you. And over to you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Chandrasekhar. And such a long introduction really inspires me, though you spoke about me, or re-inspires me. Thank you very much for it. So let me start by welcoming all the participants to this program. And I would like to go through a presentation on the subject here. So give me a second to tune to that. Yeah. Is it visible, Professor? I hope, yeah.
Yes, sir, it is.
Yeah, yes, sir, it's visible.
Yeah, thank you. So this is about mainly digital transformation and the challenges and opportunities that it provides at this point of time. So let me start by a very interesting personal experience of mine. It comes in the first two slides. So you just watch it. So this was the situation in '89, and where a person had to walk for 70 kilometers without food and famished and so on to just get 30 rupees of pension in those days, which was not received for 6 months. So from there, where are we today? So it is really such a huge change. People need not go somewhere and ask for something which is not given to them, etc. Their due eligibility. So such a kind of we call it kind of transformation over this period. It's almost 30 years. This has happened. So what does it show? Basically, as Professor Chandrasekhar was mentioning, we were talking about e-governance, etc. So there are several definitions of e-governance, but I firmly believe that e-governance means empathetic governance. Empathy. All major projects, good projects, arise out of such an empathy as the basis. Like whether somebody did not get a pension, so it creates some empathy. What can you do about it? Using technology or not using technology, right? So that is the point that is important in the whole talk I'm going to give today. So in terms of the evolution, just one, because I have been traveling with it almost for 30 years. So a lot of improvements have taken place as a result of technology being advanced, the needs being different, numbers increasing significantly over the period, and so on. So we started initially with just efficiency. How can we be more efficient? How can you see that the old woman gets the pension on the first of the month without any trouble? Then next one is citizen centricity. How can you develop more projects, whether it is e-Seva, e-Suvidha, so many programs have come, Passport Seva, etc. Then mobile governance, everything, at the time when, within a few years that the mobile became popular in the country, m-governance for convenience. You can just sitting anywhere, just with a connected mobile in your hand, you are able to do so many things. Then currently we are in the era of digital transformation, where you can bring about a lot of innovation and a holistic view of using IT in organizations. And in the dotted line in the top of the graph is the things that will appear in future: invisible government and visible governance. Government need not be, you don't have to go there, you don't have to see anybody, you don't have to kind of it need not be seen at all. And finally, invisible governance, that the society goes on its own without, having even the least feeling that there's somebody sitting somewhere calling the shots. So in the next probably 20 years, we'll reach that stage. Since I have seen for 30 years, possibly if I happen to be living long enough, probably I will see those phases as well. So that's the kind of historic evolution, and we are somewhere in this space currently. So I'll be talking about the digital transformation in this next 30, 40 minutes. So what is this? Is it a new hype that is created around the new, terminology like digital transformation, or is there something to it? So a formal definition says that it's a fundamental change in how an organization delivers value to its customer. So it's value based completely, as against the previous thing of efficiency and giving a service here and a service there, versus a holistic value being given to the concerned customer, who in this case, in the case of government, it's mostly the citizens and the businesses, right? So this is what we are going to talk about, the digital transformation scenario. What is this? What does it take? What are its characteristics, and what are the problems in achieving such a transformation? So what are the main pillars of this digital transformation? I will, while there are so many, enablers for a digital transformation, I have named only here 4 of them, which is business process transformation, which is to do with simple things like changing a form, making it simpler, straightforward, and easy to fill. Business model transformation, the way it is delivered to the people, is also very important. Delivery, especially in these days of COVID, we have all seen how quickly business here, meaning including the government's business of providing various services. So we have seen how quickly the delivery mechanisms have totally got transformed in these days. And domain transformation is the fundamental change that in the definition, there's a fundamental change, basic change. The act itself is abolished, or it is changed altogether, and a new legislation is brought, etc. So, and last is but not the least, is the organizational transformation. The people who, administer that particular sector, whether it is in the public or private sector. So what kind of organizational changes are required for transformation? Very typically what happens is, there is some law called Conway's law, which says that when you develop systems, you tend to develop that system, which is a mirror image of your existing organization, your communication systems, your organization system, your reporting systems, and your do's and don'ts get infused into that system. You may be using the most advanced technologies, all right. But if you want those technologies to fit exactly the organization structure that was created 40 years ago, 30 years ago, obviously there is a mismatch. It won't be the most efficient way, obviously, of using a transformational idea. The idea is transformational, but the organization is left high and dry, age-old organization. So there is a misfit, so it won't deliver its best. So changing the people's mindset and changing the organization itself, the reporting structures, etc. also, and empowering the people at the cutting edge. Otherwise, the guy at the delivery point, he says, no, mere paas instructions nahi hai. I don't have instructions I'll have to report to my boss, and he has to report to his boss. So where are you? So there is a need for empowerment also of people at the cutting edge level. So these are all organizational issues which have nothing to do with technology as such. But once you do that reorganization, you can derive the best out of the technology. So these are the key kind of pillars one has to see while we are at the design stage itself. These need to be taken care of. You can't retrofit most of them after you have developed your project, implemented your project. If you want to change the business model or business process, it becomes messy. If you want to change the organization at a later point, the people may not agree. So it is necessary that these are all by design incorporated in the initial stages of the project itself and the conceptualization itself. If you do this well, obviously it will be a great success and create that impact as early as possible. Now, what are the drivers? Why are we talking today of digital transformation? So there are several drivers which kind of compel us to look at this concept called digital transformation, which is, it could be technology induced. For instance, if there were no mobile phone, we would not have a variety of apps and uses that happen also in the public sector as well as mostly in the private sector. So the transformation is induced by the technology, which makes it possible, right? Anytime, anywhere was said long time back, but it is possible sitting anywhere in any corner. If you are just having a connected mobile in your hand, anywhere, anytime is possible because of that. Then customer induced, what are the requirements which have changed? Aspirations of the customers have changed. So it may compel us to change the way we give service. Ecosystem induced, meaning that other players in the, say for instance, in the health delivery, if there is a very efficient and effective hospital in the neighborhood, then obviously the other hospitals in that area and the service providers in that area will have to kind of emulate that, and ecosystem itself drives certain kind of introspection of where we are and what we are, and then try to match it. And then innovation induced, which is a totally new idea, which was not contemplated when the service was introduced or when the in any particular sector. So a lot of startups are coming with brilliant ideas, and so you can't. It's not known what is the kind of startup mentality is that I don't know really what I will achieve. I know that I have to make a difference in that space, but what kind of a difference? How do I achieve it, etc. Is he on the day one he may not know, or she may not know, the innovator. So once it is done, then it induces further digital transformation in that space. And what is it we are trying to do it for at the end of the day? Why? What is the end? Is a better customer experience that is not hassled by having to take their service. It's a pleasure to take customer delight, they call it also. It's a delightful experience. I remember, when 20 years ago, before the passport project was launched, for decades, people were standing in queue for hours outside the passport office. And to get the early, ahead in the queue, they used to go at 6 a.m. One could see the queue starting at 6 a.m. About 20, 30 people would have already congregated there. And by the time that turn comes, it was 11 a.m. or something like that. But when they're done with it, 11 to 12. So imagine, what is that experience? It's not a kind of a good experience to have. And likewise, other examples. Even in the private sector, it existed. Not that I'm singling out government, but it's something which everybody knows. So I'm quoting that. Operational flexibility. I have more choices as a citizen. And then service innovation. A service which I never imagined has come about through innovation in an innovative manner. And COVID also has spurred a lot of innovation. The way services are being delivered today, without our having to move out of the house or out of the place where we are seeing the reconfiguration of the systems to and innovation, a lot of innovation taking place as such. So this is about digital transformation. What is pushing the digital transformation agenda and what are we getting on the right side, you see that. Now, one simple kind of a differentiation, because when you're talking of digital, why, is it a better word, more attractive word? Previously, we were calling it electronic services, e-services, e-governance. Now we are calling it, is it become fashionable, more fashionable to call it digital service, or something really solid about it, substantial about it, digital service? So I have in this chart here shown a basic difference, that digital means end to end. You just touch a button and then till the time you get out of that, your job is completely done. You don't have to go here and there. The requirements are all envisaged and then connected digitally to wherever it has to connect, and you have the result. Then multi-channel, personalized, localized in your own language, AI driven, sometimes anticipating what you want. It also suggests and a better user experience. And it's not a one-off solution. If you want, it is enterprise-wide. Whatever interactions you want with that particular enterprise is all done at one place. You don't have to go to different places to do different things with that enterprise. Then one significant technological difference is previously it was SOA based. For instance, early days of SOA, I remember how much we had to struggle to put eSeva in place. I was working closely with the team on a day-to-day basis. And SOA was just around the corner around 99, I'm telling. And in CARD project, which Chandrasekhar had mentioned, it was not even there, 97, 96. 99, it was just, on the horizon, and we picked it up and used it in eSeva to bring 40 different services onto one screen. So that you go to a eSeva center, at one counter, you could do 20 different things, which you had to do. Routine things though, but for which you had to go from place to place in the town. So versus that was state of the art in those days. We had a breakthrough of using that technology, and really it was very exhilarating. Late in the night, one night when we broke through that, it was such a delight for all of us doing that program, designing, developing that program. So versus it has become much more easy now with APIs on microservices architecture being there. It would be much easier to do eSeva today than 20 years ago. And internet and new technologies have come, and scalability is infinite, and then interoperability is by default, and Agile and DevOps are the new, buzzwords in the industry, software development industry. So these are set of things that distinguish a digital service from a typical electronic service, which was there in the past. So just to, when we are dealing with the subject, we should know a little bit fundamentals of why it is called digital. That's why I kept this slide. So what is this transformation? Okay, we have talked about digital, but let us talk a minute on the transformations. It's called digital transformation today, this talk. So having talked about digital, let me talk a little bit about transformation. What is this? Cheese kya hai? Transformation, what does it mean in real life? It's a good word, nice to hear this word, but asli mein, what is it? So at different levels it operates. At the highest level, transforming the polity, the way the governance of the country and the states are done, which is of course several more complex thing, like electoral reforms and a lot of leadership and decentralization, etc. Government-citizen relationship is also to be. These are outside, not purely within the realm of technology as such, but all the same required. And the other layers are the legal systems, the process transformation, domain transformation happen there. Transforming the civil service, okay, so that the kind of intention behind transformation is carried out by the civil servants. Of course, this very program is meant for through the IIM in Vizag, is part of the capacity building. Once we know the power of something, we can and how to go about it, we do a better job. And lastly, a variety of services also, can be delivered in a very transformed way using this concept. So at 5 different layers, the transformation has to happen. And digital transformation, while it involves all the 5 layers, possibly, it is more concerned with the layers in the last 3 layers that are shown here. Transforming the systems, transforming the people, transforming the law, right? Yeah. So having said that, let me state a few of the fundamental principles which underlay any transformation. I have listed 5 of the top requirements in the form of principles which guide us in the designing, conceptualization, and designing and development of any initiative. First of all, IT should not be seen as an end. It's IT's objective should be aligned to the departments or the business goals of the department. If the goal changes, obviously you need to realign the IT systems to fulfill that new goal. So it's not the other way around, that the business objectives do not align to IT, but IT objectives should align to the business. That is the correct sequence. So in one of the famous writer wrote this: begin with the end in mind. Begin with the end in the mind, which is, I mean, syntactically it may look abstract. Okay, begin with the end. How do I begin with the end? No, end means here the end purpose you want to achieve. Have that very clearly in your mind, then obviously whatever you do in designing, developing that project will go right, in the right direction. Second is, be bold in setting the scope. Don't be narrow-minded in defining the scope. Ek service deke chhod lenge. Just let me do this small bit first and then leave the rest for future. No, have a holistic view of the entire enterprise or department. So they say elsewhere, I have talked about that. Think big, start small, scale fast. Your thought should be big. Whether it is eSeva, we had hundreds of services in mind at one. The objective was to bring everything to one place, one-stop shop was the vision. And the vision for Passport Seva project, for instance, was that entire operation should be substantially paperless. Nobody should stand in line. Nobody should wait more than 45 minutes having gone to any center, Passport Seva center. Such things, which is cutting across the whole enterprise. Then architecture and standards are very important for sustainability, for interoperability, and for various reasons, which I need not go into, but very important. Then a design which is a little bit flexibility. It's not, don't engrave it or cut it in rock or steel, so that it becomes inflexible tomorrow for any change. There should be a room for enhancement as you go. You won't get the best design on day one. 20 years, 30 years experience also doesn't matter. You will never get it right the first time. The most elegant and convenient architecture would not come there. So let it be adaptive, so that there is a room for improvement always. But execution on whatever changes are made very quickly. Agile manifesto, they say. Most of you who have dealt any time with the current software development methodologies, they call it Agile manifesto. So, okay, I don't care for what changes are contemplated. Previously, I have to redo from the beginning. The waterfall, other methods also typically. I have to recast my SRS, FRS, everything, and then HLD, LLD, everything I have to read. Then I will go for coding. This is not required in Agile methodology. So, adaptive design and then Agile execution. I don't care about any changes being made because I can do it in 1 week's time. I can realize it in 1 week time. So aim to disrupt is very important. What kind of disruption are you causing? If, it is one of the things about e-governance, and also definitely true of digital, more true of digital transformation, is that If you have not disrupted anything, you have not done anything. Better don't do that project in the first instance. Disrupt is the goal. In a positive way, I'm saying that, if you have not pained anybody, if you have not tread on anybody's toes, you know what I mean, especially in the government. You have to displease certain groups of people who have some vested interests, something. What is it you are trying? Whom are you trying to help? A few people who have some interest in the thing, or the whole population at large? Obviously, you need to tread on some toes if you have to disrupt. Right? That is one of the principles. Not in a vindictive manner. Just because Mr. Satyanarayana said disrupt, don't be like a bull in a china shop. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there should be a disruption in terms of the way the service is. You're rocking the boat, so to say. You are making that impact in a positive way. In that process, some people may be adversely affected. Fine. In the sense that they had a vested interest which is being demolished now. Fine. But the larger population is benefited, is what I'm saying. So some of the basic principles are like this. So I just want to go online and show what is the size of this Digital India. It's a very nice slogan, but what is the substance behind it? So some of you might have seen this, but for the benefit of others, I'm just showing this here. You can just see the screen. Ninaji, do you see that? Pandaji? Screen?
Sir, I still see your current screen, the PPT screen.
Okay. Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. I will just go there.
Yeah.
Right. I reshare it and then it will come.
Yeah.
Okay. Because going online, it happens sometimes. Yeah. So you will see it now. Okay. Yeah. You can just see this. This is a synopsis of real time what is happening across the whole of India. About 4,000 electronic services which are aggregated in real time from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, from Arunachal to Gujarat. So you can see the numbers rolling, I hope, on your screen. Yeah. So real time, as some birth certificate is issued, some land record is issued, some passport is issued, these numbers keep on rolling anywhere, anytime happening. So we have done 53.99. Tonight it will cross 54 billions, obviously. And in this month, 2.33 billions, as you see. This is the kind of size what you're talking in a country of 1.23 billion. It is almost 50 transactions so far in 10 months' time per individual, per capita have happened in this country. So, and you can see the kind of growth despite COVID being there, since it should be actually, in the last year also. In this year, we have just see in 10th month itself, we have almost touched, 12 months of last year. So in 2 months, we are going to go somewhere here. It could be at this rate crossing 60 billion this year, despite COVID being there. So this is odd. Because of COVID, more people have gone online. It's arguable, right? So it's a very interesting site. I will urge upon you to have a look at this very interesting site. Real time, up to last 10-15 seconds across the whole country. Whatever happens is this I had created anecdotally in 2012 when I took charge as secretary to Government of India in IT department, and the cabinet secretary had asked me, how many people are you helping through your programs? I had no clue. When I came back and asked, it was a very approximate, because manual way of counting these services, monthly periodicals, and some states report, some departments report, some don't report. You add up through an Excel sheet, etc. So it was not at all visible what is the effect. So within a month, we created this portal with about 40-50 services initially. Then today, you see 4,000 services are reported centrally. You can drill down to which service, which state, all those reports, very interesting reports are there in this. You can explore that. Which state is, leading, and which, agriculture, for instance, e-courts, land records. This is the kind of thing that is happening here. And also you can see, you will be pleased to know that these are the state-wise, leading states in terms of who is leading and who is lagging in digital kind of scenario. So you can see AP is kind of way ahead, and Gujarat, Telangana, and Kerala, and Uttar Pradesh. Uttar Pradesh, when we started, another anecdote is, because you're all in the government mostly, so I'm telling. When we started the portal, I had gone to Uttar Pradesh. I met the chief secretary. And Uttar Pradesh was nowhere in the chart. It was, out of 32 states, it was 29 or 28, despite being the largest state. I said, then he said, no, how can it be? Let me work on this, sir, and we'll come back. And within 1 year, we'll be in the top 5. So pretty soon, you see, at least in a few years' time, Uttar Pradesh is the top 5 of this, just anecdotally, I'm telling. This set a lot of healthy competition between the states. They look at it almost on a weekly, monthly basis and see where am I. You can just drill down to what kind of services are being given in AP and what kind of services are being given in Gujarat. You can drill down up to district level, sub-district level, service-wise, using this kind of a tool. It has become a very useful tool for governance as such, So this is just interesting thing, anecdote I thought I could share with you. Okay, I will go back to the presentation mode as such. I hope it was visible, Professor, what I showed in the portal.
Yeah, very much.
Yes, sir, it was.
Yeah, no, do you see my other screen? No, not yet. Yeah. Let me go back and, yeah, I was here, right?
Yeah, yes, we can see that.
Okay, so this is about just, you can always use the PPT, which I have already sent, you can share with the participants, so they can also just explore this particular interesting site. It encompasses not only states, but all central ministries also. All in, entire thing, whatever is happening in India is in one screen view of that, and number of reports, business analytics, everything is there behind that, in that portal. It's called eThal. Very interesting anecdote again, that I took the concept and the working model to the Honorable Minister at that time, Kapil Sibal ji, one of the most brilliant persons, there. He was my minister. Then he closed his eyes for 30 seconds and said, "You call it eThal." So it's a rhythm. It's like a music, it should be. So we named it eThal, and then he said Thal. Then I added eThal. And then when I was going back to my office in Lodi Road from his office after the meeting, then on the way I thought, what can be an acronym for this? So it occurred to me that e-transactions aggregation and analysis layer. So first the name was given, then it was expanded into a longer name, anecdote. So you will see that on the site itself, just anecdotally. So today we're talking of not systems, but the next higher level of thinking is in terms of ecosystems. From systems to ecosystems is the concept that is currently the hot thing in India. So the earliest example of such a large nationwide ecosystem is of digital ID, which is called also Aadhaar. I'm going to speak a little bit about it. And then digital payments, which is called the UPI, Unified Payments Interface, which made a huge difference in terms of digital payments. So which are already I have ticked it as having been done, like in a to-do list, when you complete something. So these are all very vibrant and good across the whole country. And what is in the process right now is health, an ecosystem for health, whether it is public hospital, private hospital, primary healthcare, secondary, tertiary healthcare, lab or research or anything, medical education. How can you have that kind of an ecosystem approach there, urban, rural, etc. So we are creating that. I'm going to speak a little bit about these two things in the quick as a case studies. And similar thing, this is called NDHM. Health is called National Digital Health Mission. And education, it's called NDR. Very soon, Professor, you will be encountering that word, NDR, National Digital Education Architecture. So I'm co-chairing this with Education Secretary. And I chaired this committee on last year on health mission. And also I'm co-chairing one with Agriculture Secretary, which is called IDEA, India Digital Ecosystem for Agriculture. And one for these three are actively going on currently, the middle layer. And the remaining have just started, somewhere in the initial stages, etc. So I'm also associated with the rural development. The work is starting on Tuesday, 3 days from now, in creating that ecosystem architecture where the distinction between public, private is blurring, and NGO. For instance, in rural development, a lot of NGOs do work. For everything, why should they go here and there, and why can't they be more efficient and share the information, etc. So that's going to be the theme of rural development and so on. So the key point I'm making is that gone are the days when we're talking of a system with blinkers, that I look after my department, my particular, role as such, and program for it, design some system for it. No, you think larger, remove your blinkers, and then look across the whole wider, canopy of things and create systems. So that's the idea of ecosystem which we are developing currently. So this is the latest thing. Globally also, this kind of thinking is rare. When we expose these things to some of the advanced countries also, they say, just sit up and say, oh, there's something to what is being done here. Yeah. So let me, having said so much about theory with some anecdotes here and there, let me spend 5 minutes each on Aadhaar and NDHM before closing. As mentioned by Professor Chandrasekhar, I had the privilege of being the chairman of Aadhaar for 3 years, so till last year. And I was chairing the committee on National Digital Health Mission, which is under, I'm also advisor currently for its implementation in pilot stage. So this is from my personal experience. So there are several scores of other good projects, but since I can't, number one, talk about all of them. Number two, it's better that I talk from the projects that I was associated with. So everyone in this country knows about Aadhaar. It needs very little interaction. It's designed as a platform for digital inclusion. A person who had no identity, no face at all, no identity at all, you are giving an identity which is straight away digital and state of the art. Nowhere in the world, this kind of, and this large and this kind of well-designed system exists in any other country. So we should be proud of this platform. So idea is to not only give that identity, which is digital and unique across the country, and a platform to authenticate any transaction using that Aadhaar. So it does two things. One is identification, second is authentication. Two major services that Aadhaar provides. One is giving a permanent identity, unique identity to a person. Second is using that identity, that person can do so many transactions from day-to-day basis, month-to-month basis, interacting with public and private systems as such, anytime, anywhere. So this is the kind of And unique. Most of us know that Aadhaar is based on uniqueness. Its strength lies in its uniqueness. How does that uniqueness come? The very previous slide, which is the fingerprint example here. So though it is unconventional to ask a professor a small question, but I'm compelled to ask for the sake of interest. For generating this uniqueness, for instance, I don't have Aadhaar. I've gone to a center, enrolled myself, gave my fingerprints. Before I am given a go-ahead and an Aadhaar number is assigned, how many computations does Aadhaar server do before uniqueness is established? Any guess, Professor?
No, sir. I would rather pass it to Nina, who is from computer science.
Yeah, Nina, please.
No, I would say so. It would depend upon the number of Aadhaar IDs which have already been issued, because it has
Correct.
to be compared
Correct.
to each of them. So yeah, some power of the number of IDs which are already been issued.
Yeah, yeah. It comes to about 1.2 trillion computations it has to do. For
Wow.
one Aadhaar, imagine 1.2 trillion, because 1.2 billion Aadhaars already issued. Each has 10 fingerprints. Each fingerprint has 20 minutiae, right? And to be duplicated across all these things. So once you do that, it is 1.2 trillion computations. Before that means my single finger cannot match with any other finger of anybody in this country. Even if one finger matches, it stops, right? Because there's some fraud being committed by somebody. Obviously, I'm using one of my fingers and four of others' fingers to get one more fraud, duplicate Aadhaar. So its system stops. So just for anecdotal, what is the magnitude of compute involved to make this really unique? And I'm just giving some anecdotal, experience from that. So there are 5,000 servers across Bangalore and Manesar, two data centers to do this computation in very limited time, right? Yeah, before Aadhaar is issued. Yeah. So this is a snapshot I took yesterday there is a dashboard. You can go to UIDAI website. This dashboard is from there only. You can see that 1.267 billion, roughly 1.3 billion, almost every Indian got this, and this many updations have happened. I have changed my place. Because of marriage, my surname has changed, or something has changed, so I need to update my Aadhaar data. And these are the authentication done, 47 billions and 8 billions eKYC. So you can see here in this graph that in April and May there is substantial dip. You can all guess why, because of the incidence of COVID lockdown period, peak lockdown period. It has, but the interesting thing is, very soon it has regained its previous position. And also exceeded, you can see in some place, number of Aadhaars issued even exceeded the previous average monthly. These are monthly figures, right? And more interestingly, in terms of its usage, also there is a dip in March because of COVID, and also sometime in April here in this graph. But very soon in April, May itself, it has surpassed any average. It has in fact increased. Usage of Aadhaar authentication has increased because more digital transactions are happening because of the situation of COVID. You can see we have just gone to almost 88, 90 million, 3 million, a day are getting done. eKYCs, and almost 30 million, 3 crore people are using, 3.1, 3.2 crore people are using every day. Aadhaar is being used by 3.1 to 3.2 crore people every day. As this, this monthly figure is about 1 billion. So it's about 3 crore people every day are using currently, despite Aadhaar, or despite COVID, or because of COVID. Both one can say, right? Just to give you an idea of that. And for what purpose are they using? For social good, several things like ration, social pensions and rural employment, scholarships, and many more applications that I need not explain. So that is about Aadhaar. And the second one is about NDHB, National Digital Health Blueprint, which we had created last year. After studying so many, there was a committee which I chaired, and there were about 10, 12 other experts. And together we had designed this, and this is how it is positioned here, that health sector is different from several other sectors because universal health is important to anybody and everybody in this country, a small child to old man, rich or poor, everybody is concerned about the health. It is personal. Lot of precautions, other things need to be taken because it's personal, too very personal, very often, and vast scope in terms of the diseases, in terms of the wellness practices, etc. Technology intensive. Lot of medical devices, different types of things are emerging in addition to IT itself being complex. And continuum of care. It's not as if I can leave the health thing for an year and then pick up later. I need to, it's a continuous care. Then public and private both are big players in this, roughly 40-60 ratio. Private hospitals and practitioners and all, they are big time here. So a combination of all this, how do you design a system for this? How do you design? It's a issue of ecosystem approach here, right? You can't design a system and say, you take it or leave it. Nobody will take it. If you just design some software or some system and say, everybody shall take it, nobody will take it, right? Because of this kind of variety, it cannot address efficiently. So you have to create something which works for everybody. And that is the need for, right from beginning, I'm saying today is the day of ecosystems, not systems. So that's what we had designed in this particular kind of thing, where the key thing, it's not a kind of a completely deterministic system that we have suggested in this report. It's available on the web. You can see those who are interested and have time. NDHB, if you can Google for it, it will come. It's about 60-70 page report that we have given, where we have the key things there are a health identifier, need not necessarily be unique at this point of time, but a health identifier. Then electronic health record, which is a matter of, a sequential, compilation of all my health records. I go to different hospitals at different points of time. Traditionally, you take a bundle of your file, health file. If you are careful enough, you will keep them in a file. Otherwise, इधर-उधर फेंक देते हैं वो reports वगैरह जो आते हैं. So that when required, in an emergency or any immediate requirement, you have to search for a lot, or it's not available at all. So whereas electronic health record is a electronic record at one place, which is sequentially and specialty wise it will arrange, facility wise it can arrange, it can sort in any manner you like. So that is the beauty of electronic health record, and it is very much prevalent in several countries, but we are late to start in this game. So we have provided for an electronic health record so that I don't care if I just have my ID and then I can access my whole sequence of records just on my mobile, right? With perfect security and following the global standards in that regard. And standards, there is what is called HL7 till recently, Health Level 7 Global W3C standard. It is now called FHIR standard, Fast Health Interoperability Resources, which is a lighter version of HL7. So we have made it even lighter while adopting for India in this particular NDHP. So that you don't, while your vision is to catch up fully with FHIR, it has about 140 data sets, 143, whereas we have taken 26 only on day one, which are most essentially required in a record to keep the electronic record. So start small, and then you can always add as you go forward. With that philosophy, we have. So FHIR is an important standard. If you want to know more about, it's a very interesting thing to FHIR FHIR. It's called FHIR. but spelling is FHIR. And security and privacy, topmost concern in health. We have devoted sufficient attention to these two aspects in designing this architecture. So it has become, I mean, globally also rated very well, this particular architecture. Everybody liked the way. We went to a public consultation for about 30, 40 days, and huge sessions, very good sessions, solid sessions came, and we incorporated in this architecture, which I'm showing on the screen here, which is a multi-level architecture, meaning that there is a misconception that, when this was announced, then they said, no, how can government centralize all the record? It will be really, my privacy is disturbed and government can do anything with that record, or anybody can, blackmail me or do something bad to me. So the idea is not that. At the national level, no health record is kept at the national level. You can see from the architecture. Only the list of hospitals, list of doctors, and your number, like your Aadhaar number, one number, which is health ID, is kept. No health record, whether what is your temperature, BP, nothing of that type is kept at the national level, right? And some information exchange, etc. Right? And GIS tools, etc., which have nothing to do with health at all, is kept at the national level, and that happens only at the facility or hospital level, local level. The EMR, electronic medical record, is at the hospital level. So that's how we segregated the kind of record keeping at the level where it is generated. But others who have a need can always access. If you go from hospital A to hospital B, then hospital B can, with proper permission, access this EMR and then look at that record within few seconds. They will get, so that your entire history is available as a EHR. EHR is a link; it's not a record. So there is a myth that once you start this, my entire health data is being centralized at one place. No, nothing is centralized at all. No single item of health is kept at a national level. So that is the kind of architecture. I don't want to go into detail. You can go through the whole report. Currently, it is approved by the Government of India in May 2020. You remember, Honorable FM made a number of announcements in the revival package, COVID revival package. So one of them was approval of NDHM for implementation, and immediately almost 24/7 work was done. And the Honorable Prime Minister, on August 15th, he made a very emphatic announcement about this scheme. And as a person having been really in charge of this and preparing the whole report, and its progression was really, announcement was really very happy for me. And also currently, national, the entire thing is about how do you secure the privacy of the health data. So an exclusive and fine-grained policy is needed for that. Otherwise, you go helter-skelter, right? We can't assure of privacy unless there is a system put in place. Today, why is Aadhaar so secure and no incident has happened? Because it was designed by design, privacy by design, security by design from day one. So same thing we are doing here in this policy. We went through a public consultation on this, which we have received a couple of weeks back, and it is being put in a final shape now. And in 6 union territories have been chosen.
Excuse me, sir. Can I ask one question, sir?
Yeah.
Sir, why did we go for a separate health ID when we already had Aadhaar?
Yeah.
Is it because of security issues?
Yes. Aadhaar, again, cannot be the be all and end all for, it cannot be a replacement for an ID. It is used for authentication, basically. And that too, as per the Supreme Court judgment also, specified items only, it can be used. So technically, if there are no privacy concerns, etc., there is no need for any ID anywhere else. Aadhaar can replace all other IDs, but then the risk of privacy, the breach of risk of breach to privacy will be exponentially increasing if you use Aadhaar as the only. If somebody can get that one particular Aadhaar access to that, the entire life story, not only of health, but education, employment, travel, anything and everything will become contingent on one number. So globally also, while technology person is very comfortable, okay, why this hassle? We already got a 10,000 crores spent in creating Aadhaar. Why are you creating one more ID? Is a good question, but we have to see the long-term possibilities and of these privacy and security concerns being addressed on a long-term basis. Immediately it is tempting. Okay, let me just use Aadhaar only and not create one more. But we have to see that that's called the responsible use of technology. When you add responsible use of technology, in fact, the forum and the center I'm an advisor to now, World Economic Forum also, it is meant to take care of the responsible deployment of technology, responsible design, development, and use of technology. So that responsibility is to protect the privacy of the citizens of this country, right? So that is the reason why it is, though it's an additional work, one has to go for it.
I have a question too, sir.
Yeah, just let me one more slide, then we can open it for, kindly bear with me for just 30 seconds. I'm done with this last slide. So 4 core building blocks, they have been developed currently in Union Territories. And finally, what are the challenges? One is immediate work that has to be done by today or tomorrow supersedes the important. The architectural long-term other issues are the bigger picture, which I talked about, the holistic approach, standards, architecture. That is one challenge. People have no patience time very often. Secondly, capability of that architecture is also very important. Many ministries may not have that capability. Then how do you procure transformation? Transformation cannot be procured through a tender process strictly. Innovation, etc., cannot be procured through a tender process. So that is one challenge. And resistance to organizational and domain transformation, which I touched upon earlier, is a challenge. And hesitation in adopting bold business models like a private sector does. In the government, there are limitations in that. It's a challenge. And what are the opportunities today? Is current pandemic, COVID has pushed us to a corner where we can't but use digital technologies and go paperless, presenceless, cashless, which are the objectives of digital transformation otherwise also. And ecosystem architecture, which I mentioned earlier, we are currently working on a concept called India 2.0 work in process, which is India ecosystem architecture 2.0. We are hoping to give that ecosystem architecture so that everybody need not think about the architecture from the scratch. We are giving a framework which enables the ministries to fast track. So that framework will be ready by Jan next year. Then some of the emerging technologies are a great opportunities like AI, ML, IoT, and blockchain. Can you ingrain them mainstream into your project thinking? So these are the opportunities. And lastly, this is my favorite slide. You can just watch. You may have everything: management, technology, human resource, capacity, infrastructure, budget, partnership, everything, but still it's adding up to zero. So I always say that you should have leadership and vision, which will add tremendous value to the whole effort that's going on in any department or in a country. That's really true in life. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, I'll stop here. We have about 20 minutes, 20 minutes to Q&A. Yeah.
So I want to ask one thing, sir. With regard to NDHM, sir, you have...
Could you please introduce yourself and then ask the question?
Sir, my name is Prashant, sir. I am a student of PGP DGM course. Sir, I have a question, sir. Regarding NDHM architecture you have shown, sir. You have used two acronyms. One is EMR and one is EHR. At local level, you have stated it as EMR and at state level as EHR. So what is the difference, sir?
Yeah, medical record is related to one episode, right? Supposing I have some fever or I have some problem, I go to some hospital, X, Apollo, whatever it is. For a week, I stay in the hospital. They create number of records, number of tests and other things. It is around that particular incident, that particular episode, right? I get well and I get discharged. And after 6 months, 1 year, I go for some other purpose to some other hospital or same hospital. Another episode, another bundle is created, right? So the first one is called the electronic medical record, which is related to one episode. Whereas electronic health record is over a period of time. All my record number 1, record number, episode number 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. are chronologically linked, pieced together. Mala Jaisa. So that's called the electronic health record. Is it clear?
So how is the privacy of EHR is maintained, sir? If some person changes their state or
Yeah.
moves on, then
Yeah, it doesn't. How is your Aadhaar operating all over the country? How is your cell phone working all over the country despite changing? It is because following of standards, both for privacy as well as security, as well as the portability across the whole country is assured in that aspect.
okay,
You
sir.
go through that report, it's addressed, but only at the EHR stage, only the links are preserved there, not the whole record. It's not, EMR has the full record. Your MRI, your X-rays, your blood report is in that particular place where you got tested, right, in a secure manner. And when required, and its link is kept at EHR level. Only a link, hyperlink, that can be activated only by an authorized person. So I can selectively choose my Apollo episode records or my Max Care health record or some other record selectively as a citizen. It's in my control,
Okay,
right?
sir. Okay, sir. Thank you.
So without that consent, it's completely consent based. If I don't give consent, it lies there only. Nobody can see that. That is the broad logic.
Okay, sir.
Good evening, sir. My name is Shiv Gupta. I am a student of just 1 second.
Yeah. You have muted yourself, Shiv. Yeah. You are on mute.
Sir, I'm a student of PGP DGM batch. So I had a quick question, sir. In your slides, you have very nicely summarized about the challenges that the digital transformation procedures face. Essentially about the organizational structure. So it's about people, processes, and procedures. So for people level transformation or the organization level transformation, uh, can you identify few steps or few? How do you see the government organizations transforming to an organization that can deliver digital solutions? For example, there is GSTN, there is NPCI who have really scaled up their processes. However, there are other organizations such as Archaeological Survey of India where digital solutions will be given to them to implement. So there are two types of organizations that really need to transform to be able to deliver and to be able to absorb digital transformation within the government.
Yeah. So it's a essential thing, desirable thing, I would say, to have the organizational transformation also looked at alongside. There are several methods of restructuring the organization. If it is a public sector unit, probably it becomes much faster. But within a pure government department, it may take a little longer. But I mentioned what is desirable, right? What is a challenge and what is a desirable. That's why I put it on a challenge category. You need to, if you want a better result, you better change your organization also, either substantially or to the extent permissible. You can't obviously, discharge anybody or, relieve anybody or dismiss anybody in a public sector environment, right? You need to reskill such people or reposition such people in places that don't require digital knowledge, etc. And those who are being put in place, you are training them thoroughly on this particular area. So you need to do a mix and match of so many activities for doing that. Secondly, some organizations create a digital transformation unit altogether by picking up people who have technical knowledge, who have this transformation knowledge, people like you, for instance, who are getting trained, maybe picked up for those. They are not recruiting somebody from outside, too many people from outside, but within the same organization, you identify those who have these capabilities, assemble them into a unit, and then that starts discharging those responsibilities. Yeah, there are several ways.
Thank you, sir.
Depending on a particular department's context, and flexibility, you can do it several different ways.
Thank you, sir.
So there are a few questions in the Q&A, sir. I will read them out and probably you can answer because we have a few attendees here who
Okay.
aren't seen here. So one of them is, this question isn't very clear, but agile model. So you are digital services require agile model, but government rules are fixed. So how to implement dynamic models and how to sail through those challenges?
Yeah, it's an important question. It's like, the need for the concept of agile governance is also not only agile software development, but agile includes agile governance also, where the rule is formulated in such a manner as to be amenable to a lot of innovation and a lot of future growth without having to change the rule time and again. I'll give you a very rough example, I would say, right? See the, communication system that we have today. We are able to talk as if we are in the same place, right? Which law governs it? Can anyone tell? Which is the law that governs it? Anyone can just.
Indian Telegraph Act.
Yeah, which year? Which year was it passed?
Sir, 1880s.
Yeah,
I think.
1880s.
Almost there. 1885. 1885, Indian Telegraph Act 1885 governs the 4G, and our own Zoom conversation is regulated under Indian Telegraph Act 1885. They have not changed substantially. What all they have done is the definition of telegraph, which was designed originally when Morse code was there. I think most of you, except Professor and me, must not have seen what a Morse code machine looks like, right? None of you would have seen a Morse code being in operation, where when you had to send a telegram, right, you go to the post office and there a single key, a keyboard with single key was there, dash and dot and dash, it's called. A combination of dots and dashes used to produce the alphabets A to Z and 1 to 9 and 0. With that, they were sending to a distant place the message, which was typed there, pasted on a pink colored paper and sent, delivered, hand delivered to that person who was to receive the telegram. This was designed in 1885, this technology. But today, the very same act is able to handle 4G. Tak. Kaise hua? So they had the vision that it is the communication which you need to specify in the law and not Morse code. Morse code word is also not there in that. The technology behind Morse code is not there, hard coded. So obviously, all these new technologies, by a mere small change, they could really innovate substantially. So what I meant is agile governance has to provide for the possibility of innovation going forward, so that every time you don't have to go to legislature or rule making authority. I hope it answers. It's a very rough example, but I'm telling that the need of the hour is agile governance. Certain principles of agile governance in terms of legislation and rule making have to be observed. You're on mute.
Yeah. If somebody else has a question, otherwise I will read it. Read the question. Which
Ma'am,
is
I
been
have a
given.
question, ma'am.
Yeah,
Can
go
I
ahead,
ask?
please. Yeah.
Sir, good evening, sir. I am Shomadipta Datta. I work for the Ministry of Textiles, Government of India.
Ministry of Textiles.
Textiles.
Okay.
Sir, in your second slide, sir, you said like for the evolution, finally there is invisible governance, and government is not there. So whether a government will like to have an invisible governance where its role becomes like blurred, means what will the government do then? I work for the government, then what I will do if the governance is
You're-
invisible?
Yeah, it is. It is very roughly. You are the dialogue writer. You are the script writer. You are the background singer. You are not seen on the screen, right? But the benefit goes to the viewer of that movie. So likewise, I'm just. It is 2050, 2050. It may come. Some countries it's beginning to happen. Scandinavian countries and all. So that's what I mean to say. It's a futuristic scenario where you're doing what all you need to do, but in a manner that doesn't touch the citizen on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, I will take another question, which is by the attendees. Sir, you have explained about various projects government is taking up in various disciplines. In my opinion, there is a big need of digital transformation in the field of labor and employment, more so in the case of unorganized sector. The first step is to integrate all the labor databases of all states and center with Aadhaar. Would like to hear your thoughts on this, sir.
Yeah, I did mention in the bottommost layer from the questionnaire, of course, is that in the pyramidical 9 major systems, in the bottom layer you see employment and labor, right? So an ecosystem skill development is related to that as well. So labor, employment, skill development. This space, there is one ecosystem being designed. Only on Monday, of this recent Monday, the secretary held a initial meeting, kickoff meeting in that direction. So the thought process is on for what you have mentioned already. But it will be 6 months before you come up with an architecture, and another 6 months before the pilots are done. But we have started the journey.
So there's one more, sir. I'll finish this off and then probably somebody else. How is USA's social security number different from India's Aadhaar?
Yeah, USS SSN is several decades old. Brought about in the context of providing, probably social security during some economic situation there. But later it picked up somewhere in 1935 or so, if I remember correctly. And it picked up other uses, like being used for various other purposes. Almost 35 different purposes it is being used, number one. It has longer history compared to Aadhaar as such. Number one, it doesn't have any biometric authentication method. It's only an identification number. As I said, two things. One is unique number. Second one is authentication. In the vision part of Aadhaar, I have shown there are two components. One is identity proofing, and second is authentication. So SSN is used for identification, but not for authentication, because there is no means for linking with any biometrics, etc. They don't have biometrics there. That is the fundamental difference between the two.
I have a question, if I may ask. With the interaction that I am having, my first interaction with a lot of people who are coming from government, and I'm teaching them courses, what I feel is that the same kind of applications, solutions are being developed at many states, within states, also for districts. So does the central government think that we should have a repository? And I think it is done in Kerala, where I've heard that they have some repository where before they implement a solution, they go to that repository and check if it is available or not. So any such initiative that the government is thinking?
The idea is not to kind of be prescriptive in terms of what can be done, because each state has its own kind of situation there, scenarios and localization requirements and specific requirements. So it is not within the same, say, land records also. There is a lot of variance between Kerala and Assam, for instance. So it's not possible to have a uniform kind of a systems within, but the idea of they should be interoperable. The key thing is they should be interoperable where required. In a land matter, land doesn't move, so interoperability may not be required. But health situation, interoperability is required across whole country, pan-India. So what is important there is to ensure the interoperability happens, but not the it is unifying, but not unified or uniform. Unifying is fine, but not unified or uniform. Because the slogan for India, if you all remember that it is unity in diversity is our motto, right? How do you create some sort of unity in a country with vast diversity? That is the motto for any the ecosystem development, whether it is NDHM, whether the idea for agriculture, for NDR for education, whether for skill development, whether for rural development. We don't want to steamroll everything into one size fits all doesn't work here. You have to see that how different applications can interoperate. Then it gives room for innovation and flexibility at the local level. That's what unity in diversity is the answer to your question.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sir, I am Dharmendra from Andhra Pradesh FiberNet Limited, sir.
Yeah.
Actually, my question is related to the security of national health records. How to protect the data and where is the abstraction levels from district, from the primary health center to the central repository. Even this data is available to the primary health center, the repository national level is directly been accessed. How we can say that the national level government did not know about the data of a primary level center? And other things, if someone is accessing the data of primary centers, if the patient got any OTP from there, how they know that my whole data has been accessed by any other persons?
Yes.
So this kind of abstraction of a data is the biggest problem I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I do
so
agree
how it
that
will be overcome? Misuse and because it's what happened in everywhere. The DNA has been changed for the many South African country to know about the health records.
Yes.
For the particular tribal area.
Yeah, let me say two things. Number one, it can happen even in the non-digital era also. Anybody can, non-NDHM time also it can happen. Most of these records are in digital shape and digital form in somewhere in the advanced hospitals and laboratories. But having said that, let me say that it is envisaged to happen through a consent-based access to those records. A lot of obligations have been put under the data management policy that I talked about, which will be public comments have been received and we are putting it in a final shape. The ministry is putting in a final shape. So they provide for all these contingencies that the citizen is in complete control without my knowledge, and like my fingerprint, without my fingerprint, Aadhaar cannot be used, right? So such inbuilt safeguards in the design itself have been kept. My request is to see, for you to see two things. One is the NDHM report, which is available on the net. And number two, the HDM policy, Health Data Management Policy, which is available in the ministry's website. In view of the shortage of time, I can't go into nuances of what you have said, but kindly go through these two documents. It will be very, very clear.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Sir, Regita here. I'm also a student of PGP DGM. Sir, we know that you are one of the persons behind or the architect of India architecture. Sir, whether the India architecture is envisaged to be adopted across nation by different states, but we also understand that it is being adopted only in few states like Meghalaya or as e-Pragati in Andhra Pradesh. What is the challenge in extending it to all the states in the country, sir? Will it be done soon?
Important question again, but let me answer very shortly in a short manner, which is that INDEA India. I was also chairing the committee which designed that 4 or 5 years ago, but we found that the uptake is not that encouraging because for several reasons. We identified the reasons. It was theoretically very good and comprehensive document, but from pragmatic and practical point of view, people will finding it very heavy and time taking to implement that architecture. So while a few states have adopted and some of the principles, see, any such, it's a framework. So a framework need not be implemented in all its entirety by anybody. While it has done some good, people have taken those principles, those models, and modeled their own architectures going forward. But in a typical, end-to-end basis, it was not adopted. So having realized that, the ministry has now commissioned a work on 2.0, how to make it light and simple and prescriptive in nature, right? So that it is easier, much more easier and flexible for ministries to adopt. So we are on the job, as I mentioned in my talk. We aim to complete it by end of January and create a much lighter version of India. It's called India 2.0.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, we're done with.
I
Yeah,
think you can.
looks like so. I would request Sheena. So we thought one of the students should give a vote of thanks for such a interesting talk
Yeah,
that we
from my
had.
side, I really enjoyed talking to all of you. And
No, sir. It's our pleasure and
yeah,
privilege. It has been wonderful.
yeah.
And I mean,
So my last message, Chandrasekhar ji, is to all the participants to make a difference in 1 year's time, whatever you're doing, wherever you are. Thank you. Please go ahead.
wonderful.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll do the formal honors. Respected Satyanarayan sir, respected Professor Chandrasekhar, respected all the other faculty members, other participants, and my colleagues. Sir, it was enlightening to hear you and hear your about your wide experience and views on the various initiatives in digital transformation, and especially hear them from practical perspective as to how they are being implemented across the country. And I would like to thank you, sir, to take out your time and enlighten us and educate us about this on behalf of the entire PGP DGM batch and the IIM Vizag family. And sir, I realized that as the first ever batch in digital governance and management, which is graduating from IIM Vizag and is being sponsored by MIT, it becomes even more important for us that we understand and imbibe all these learnings and implement these in our practical work spheres. And we assure that we would implement all our learnings into the work sphere, and we realize that we have a lot of work to do. So once again, sir, thank you for the enlightening talk, and it was very enlightening and encouraging. And thank you for inspiring us, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, Dr. Sheena is a medical doctor, and she is from the cadre. She is an IAS officer of 2012 batch.
Oh, great.
And working in Punjab as an additional secretary.
Sheena, once again,
Thank you
make
so
a
much,
difference in the healthcare sector.
Definitely, sir. In fact, sir, when I was hearing about the healthcare sector, I realized, sir, we have a project in Punjab, in my district right now, and it is being done as a pilot project in coordination with the AIIMS New Delhi. So it also involves monitoring the healthcare data for especially the non-communicable diseases and to have the repository of the data. So it is a pilot project. Let us see how it goes.
Okay. Thank you all.
Once again, sir, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.